When was the last time someone told you to stop overthinking and you wanted to scream? Not because they were wrong, but because they didn't understand that you can't just turn it off. That your mind doesn't have a shallow setting. That while they're moving through life at surface level, you're 7 layers deep into a conversation that ended 3 hours ago, still analyzing what that pause meant, what that tone implied, what that silence was really saying. If that's you, you're not broken. You're a deep thinker. And here's what people don't understand. It's not a superpower. It's not a curse. It's both. The same depth that lets you see patterns others miss is the same depth that won't let you rest. Think about it. How often do you find yourself in a conversation where you're 3 steps ahead of what's being said? Someone's telling you about their day, and you're already analyzing the underlying emotional subtext, connecting it to something they mentioned 2 weeks ago, noticing the inconsistency in their story, wondering what they're not saying. And you can't turn it off. You can't just listen casually. Your brain is wired to dig, to question, to find meaning in everything, even when there isn't any, even when you wish you could just take things at face value and move on. Psychologists call this cognitive complexity. It's when your mind naturally operates in multiple dimensions simultaneously. You're not just processing information, you're cross-referencing it with past experiences, future implications, alternative interpretations, and existential significance, all at once. And while that sounds impressive, it's actually exhausting. Because most people aren't doing this. Most people can hear a story and just react. They can experience a moment without immediately dissecting it. They can have a feeling without needing to understand why they're having it. But you need to know why, always. And that need doesn't give you peace, it gives you rabbit holes. Here's where it gets complicated. Deep thinkers aren't just analytical, they're emotionally deep too. Which means you don't just think about things intensely, you feel them intensely. Someone says something slightly off, and while everyone else moves on, you're sitting with it for days. You're replaying it. You're trying to decode it. You're creating narratives about what it means about you, about them, about the relationship. And the worst part, you know you're doing it. You're fully aware that you're overthinking. But awareness doesn't stop it. If anything, it makes it worse. Because now you're overthinking your overthinking. Neuroscientifically, this happens because deep thinkers often have what's called a hyperactive default mode network. That's the part of your brain that's active when you're not focused on the external world, when you're daydreaming, reflecting, introspecting. For most people, this network quiets down when they engage with tasks, but for deep thinkers, it never fully shuts off. Your mind is always making connections, always searching for meaning, always running background processes even when you're trying to focus on something simple. It's like having 50 browser tabs open in your brain, and you can't close any of them because they all feel important. And here's what that does to you over time. It isolates you. Not because you want to be alone, but because most conversations feel shallow. Most people aren't interested in exploring ideas the way you are. They're content with surface-level explanations. They don't need to understand the why behind the why behind the why. And when you try to go deep, when you ask the questions that actually matter to you, you watch people's eyes glaze over. You see them mentally check out. And you learn, slowly, painfully, that your natural way of thinking makes other people uncomfortable. So you start editing yourself. You start keeping your thoughts inside. You start pretending you're satisfied with small talk when really you're dying for a conversation that actually goes somewhere. But here's the paradox. The same mind that craves depth also craves simplicity, because deep thinkers are often the most exhausted people in the room. You spend so much energy analyzing everything that by the end of the day, your brain is fried. You've lived 17 different versions of reality in your head. You've considered every possible outcome of decisions you haven't even made yet. You've had full arguments with people who don't know you're upset with them. And all of that happens internally, silently, while you're just sitting there looking normal. No one sees the chaos. No one understands why you're so tired when you haven't done anything physically demanding. Because your exhaustion isn't physical, it's cognitive, it's emotional. It's the weight of carrying too many thoughts with nowhere to put them down. There's also a loneliness that comes with this, a specific kind of loneliness that's hard to explain. Because you're not alone because you lack people. You're alone because you lack people who think like you. You're surrounded by conversations that don't satisfy you, by relationships that never go as deep as you need them to, by a world that values speed over depth, conclusions over questions, certainty over curiosity. And you're standing there with a mind that can't do shallow, that can't pretend to care about things that don't matter, that can't turn off the part of you that needs to understand everything. Philosophers have talked about this for centuries. Kierkegaard wrote about the anxiety of infinite possibility, the paralysis that comes from seeing too many options, too many meanings, too many layers. Deep thinkers live in that anxiety constantly, because when you can see multiple perspectives on everything, decision-making becomes torture. You can argue both sides of any choice. You can see the potential consequences of every path. You can imagine all the ways things could go wrong. And instead of making you wise, it makes you stuck, because certainty feels impossible when you can always find a reason to doubt. And here's what people don't tell you about being a deep thinker. It doesn't make you smarter, it makes you slower. Because while everyone else is making quick decisions and moving forward, you're still analyzing, you're still considering, you're still trying to find the perfect answer that accounts for every variable. And life doesn't wait for that. Opportunities pass, moments slip by, connections fade, all because you were too busy thinking about them instead of experiencing them. But there's another layer here, one that's even harder to talk about. Deep thinkers often struggle with presence, with being here, now, fully, because your mind is always somewhere else. You're in a conversation, but you're also thinking about what you need to do later, what you should have said earlier, what this interaction means in the larger context of your life. You're watching a sunset, but you're also thinking about impermanence, about time, about mortality. You can't just be. You're always thinking about being. And that split, that constant meta-awareness, it robs you of the simplicity that other people seem to access so easily. Here's where it shows up in daily life. You might find yourself unable to enjoy entertainment that doesn't have depth. You can't watch a shallow movie without feeling frustrated. You can't read a predictable book without getting bored. You need complexity. You need layers. You need something that challenges you to think. But then you also feel guilty about that because it makes you seem pretentious. It makes you seem like you think you're better than everyone else, when really you just have a brain that won't let you settle for surface-level anything. And you didn't choose this. It chose you. In relationships, this becomes even more complicated because you need depth, but depth requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires trust, and trust requires time. But your analytical mind makes it hard to trust because you're always reading between the lines, always looking for red flags, always trying to predict when things will fall apart. You can't just enjoy the early stages of connection. You're already analyzing compatibility, long-term potential, fundamental value alignment. You're 3 years into the future while you're still on the first date. And that kind of intensity, that level of analysis, it scares people off because they can feel it. They can sense that you're not just getting to know them casually, you're studying them. And that's a lot. But here's what deep thinkers rarely admit. Sometimes you don't want to be this way. Sometimes you see people laughing at something simple, enjoying something shallow, moving through life without all this weight, and you feel envious. You wish you could just exist without constantly questioning existence. You wish you could have a thought without immediately having 10 more thoughts about that thought. You wish your brain had an off switch, but it doesn't. And over time, you stop wishing for that and start accepting that this is just how you're wired. This is your operating system, and there's no update that's going to change it. There's also a specific kind of guilt that comes with this, because people think deep thinkers are wise. They think you have answers. They come to you with their problems expecting profound insights, and sometimes you do have them. But other times, you're just as lost as everyone else, maybe more lost. Because you can see too many sides of every issue. You can understand everyone's perspective so thoroughly that you lose track of your own. And when people expect wisdom from you, expect clarity, expect certainty, and all you have is more questions, you feel like a fraud. Like you're failing at the one thing you're supposed to be good at. Here's what neuroscience tells us about this. Deep thinkers often have heightened activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex planning, decision-making, and abstract reasoning. But they also tend to have increased connectivity between different brain regions, which means information gets processed through multiple pathways simultaneously. This creates what researchers call integrative thinking. You're constantly synthesizing information from different domains, connecting seemingly unrelated concepts, seeing patterns across disciplines. And while that can lead to brilliant insights, it also means your brain never takes the simple path. It always takes the scenic route, through every possible terrain, at once. And that's exhausting, not just mentally but emotionally. Because deep thinking isn't just intellectual, it's emotional processing too. When you think deeply, you feel deeply. You can't separate the two. So when you're analyzing a situation, you're also feeling all the potential emotions attached to every possible outcome. You're pre-experiencing anxiety about things that haven't happened yet. You're mourning losses that are still hypothetical. You're celebrating victories that might never come. Your emotional life is as complex as your intellectual life. And carrying both simultaneously is like walking through life with weights you can't put down. But here's where it gets interesting. Because despite all this exhaustion, despite all this isolation, despite all this complexity, deep thinkers wouldn't choose to be different. Not really. Because the depth, as painful as it is also what makes life meaningful. You might be exhausted by your mind, but you're also fascinated by it. You might feel lonely, but you also feel rich. Rich with ideas, with observations, with questions that most people never think to ask. And there's a strange pride in that, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that you're engaging with life at a level that most people don't even know exists. The challenge isn't to stop being a deep thinker. The challenge is to learn how to exist as one without drowning. And that means learning boundaries with your own mind. It means recognizing when analysis is serving you and when it's just spinning in circles. It means practicing presence, even when your brain wants to be anywhere but here. It means finding people, even just one or two, who can meet you at your depth without flinching. Who don't need you to explain why you care about things they consider trivial. Who understand that your questions aren't criticisms, they're invitations. It also means learning to honor both sides of yourself, the part that needs depth and the part that needs rest, the part that wants to understand everything and the part that just wants to be. Because you're not just your thoughts, you're also the awareness beneath them, the consciousness that watches your mind work. And that consciousness, that observer, doesn't need to analyze. It can just witness. And in those moments of witnessing, without judgment, without trying to figure yourself out, that's where peace lives. Not in having answers, not in understanding everything, but in being okay with not understanding. In letting some questions remain open, in trusting that not everything needs to be solved. Philosopher Rilke wrote, and it might be the most important thing a deep thinker can hear, be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. Because that's what you are, someone who loves questions, sometimes too much, sometimes at the cost of answers, sometimes at the cost of peace. But that love, that curiosity, that refusal to accept easy explanations, that's not a flaw. That's your way of honoring the complexity of existence, of refusing to reduce life to something simple when it's anything but. So if you're a deep thinker, if your mind never stops, if you're tired of people telling you to relax when relaxation feels impossible, know this: you're not overthinking. You're thinking at the depth your mind naturally operates at. And yes, it's lonely sometimes. Yes, it's exhausting. Yes, you wish you could turn it off. But it also means you're experiencing life in full resolution, while most people are seeing it in low quality. You're reading the fine print of existence, and that matters, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. You were never meant to think small. You were meant to think deep. And depth, by definition, means distance from the surface. It means being further from where most people live. But it also means being closer to truth, to meaning, to the questions that actually matter. And maybe that's enough. Maybe you don't need everyone to understand. Maybe you just need to understand yourself, to accept that this is how you're built, and to stop apologizing for needing more than what the surface offers. Because deep thinkers don't need fixing. They need understanding. They need space. They need permission to exist at their natural depth without being told it's too much. And if you felt this, if you've lived this, you're not alone. Even in your overthinking, even in your isolation, even in your exhaustion, there are others like you, thinking too much, feeling too much, existing too intensely for a world that prefers things simple. And that's okay. That's more than okay. That's exactly who you were meant to be.